If an avoidant discarded you and it felt like you were erased overnight, I need you to hear this with your whole chest. Being discarded is not proof you were disposable. It only feels that way because the discard creates a specific kind of shock, the kind that makes your brain search for a reason fast, and the fastest reason your mind can grab is, I wasn't enough. Because if you make it about your value, at least the story feels explainable. But avoidant discards are rarely a measurement of your worth. They are usually a measurement of what intimacy was asking them to face. When an avoidant discards, it often happens like a door closing with no warning. One day there's closeness, the next day there's distance. One day they're responsive, the next day you're talking to silence. And the cruelty isn't always in the leaving, it's in the confusion. It's the feeling that your love didn't even slow them down. That's why people feel disposable, because the nervous system interprets sudden disconnection as rejection at the deepest level. Your body doesn't hear, they're avoidant. Your body hears, you are unsafe to be loved. But that is not the truth. That is the injury talking. Avoidant attachment doesn't discard because you are unworthy. It discards because closeness starts demanding consistency, communication, accountability, vulnerability, emotional presence. And those demands don't feel like love to an avoidant nervous system. They often feel like pressure. Even if you ask gently. Even if you were reasonable. Even if you only wanted the basics. When someone's nervous system is wired to associate intimacy with danger, the moment things start getting real, they start looking for exits. And here's the part that changes everything. The discard is often not a statement about you, it's a coping mechanism for them. A way to reduce internal discomfort quickly. A way to regain control. A way to stop feeling exposed. A way to silence the part of them that knows they're not showing up the way a real relationship requires. So instead of stepping into growth, they step into distance. And because distance calms them, it looks like they're fine. That illusion is what breaks you. Because you're grieving and they look stable. You're shattered and they look calm. And your mind says, if they can leave so easily, I meant nothing. But what if the calm you're seeing isn't strength? What if it's shut down? What if it's avoidance doing what it always does, turning off feelings so they don't have to feel guilt, grief, or responsibility? People who feel deeply often assume everyone processes deeply. But some people survive by not processing at all. And when you've been discarded, the next trap is you start negotiating your dignity. You think, maybe I should send one more message. Maybe I should explain better. Maybe if I show them how much I care, they'll realize. That impulse is not weakness, it's attachment. It's your system trying to restore connection because connection feels like safety. But in avoidant dynamics, chasing does something dangerous. It turns your love into proof that they can withdraw and still keep access. It turns your heartbreak into reassurance for the person who caused it. So I want you to understand this clearly. Being discarded does not mean you were easy to lose. It often means you were hard to hold. Not because you were too much, but because you were real. Real love requires showing up when it's uncomfortable. Real love requires repair. Real love requires emotional honesty. And for an avoidant, the moment you became a real person with real needs, not just a pleasant experience, their defenses got activated. That's why so many people who are discarded by avoidance were actually the ones bringing depth, warmth, stability, and sincerity. You weren't disposable. You were impactful. Your presence mattered enough that it challenged their coping. Your love mattered enough that it asked them to evolve. And if someone is committed to staying emotionally the same, they will run from anything that asks them to grow, even if that thing is beautiful. Now let's talk about the specific wound that discard creates in you, because it's not just heartbreak, it's identity pain. You start wondering if you were foolish for loving. You start feeling embarrassed for caring. You start questioning your instincts. You start thinking, how did I not see this coming? And that's why this keynote is so important, because it pulls you out of self-blame and puts you back into self-respect. Your worth is not measured by someone's ability to stay. Your worth is not measured by someone's fear of intimacy. Your worth is not measured by someone's emotional capacity. Your worth is measured by the way you love, the way you show up, the way you try, the way you hold the truth even when it hurts. And the discard often happens right at the moment you stop being convenient, the moment you want clarity, the moment you want consistency, the moment you want emotional presence, the moment you want the relationship to have a real shape. Avoidance can be amazing in the early stage because the early stage has low demand. It's light, it's exciting, it's novelty. But when love starts requiring structure, that's when their system can panic. So they cut it off. Not because you weren't valuable, but because value is scary when you don't know how to maintain it. That's why you must stop interpreting discard as a verdict. A verdict is final and true. A discard is often impulsive and protective. It's a nervous system move, not a character evaluation of you. And yes, it hurts. It's still abandonment. It still deserves to be taken seriously. But it should not become your identity. And if you're thinking, but if I mattered, they wouldn't leave. Listen carefully. People leave what they don't know how to hold. People abandon what exposes their weaknesses. People run from what demands accountability when they've spent their whole life avoiding accountability. That doesn't make the leaving okay. It just means the leaving is not your proof of being unlovable. The most dangerous thing you can do after an avoidant discards you is start shrinking to become holdable. Start lowering your needs. Start making peace with crumbs. Start believing that being low maintenance is the price of being chosen. Because the moment you do that, you don't just lose them, you lose you. So when you feel that sting, I was disposable, replace it with something that keeps you standing. I was not disposable, I was real, and real love requires real capacity. Stay to the end, because avoidants don't get away untouched. They pay a heavy price, just not always immediately, and not always where you can see it. This keynote matters because it corrects the most painful illusion after a discard, the illusion that they won. When you're the one left behind, your pain is loud. You're crying, replaying, missing them, questioning your worth. And they look fine. They post, they laugh, they move on. They act like you were a chapter they closed easily. And that image can destroy you, because it makes you believe the discard was a clean victory for them and a permanent loss for you. But what you're seeing is not always freedom. It's often relief mixed with avoidance. Relief is not peace. Relief is just the pressure turning off. And for many avoidants, pressure comes from intimacy, expectations, accountability, emotional presence. So the moment they discard, their nervous system breathes. They feel calm because they escaped the discomfort of being needed. They feel better because the relationship stopped asking something of them. That's why they can look untouched at first. Their system is regulating the fastest way it knows, by removing closeness. And here's the truth most people miss. That calm is not proof you didn't matter. It's proof their coping style is shut down. It's a defense mechanism, not a measurement of your value. Avoidants often pay the price later because emotions don't disappear, they get postponed. If someone isn't used to sitting with guilt, grief, or vulnerability, they don't process it in real time. They stuff it down, they distract, they numb. They keep moving. They tell themselves stories that make them feel justified. It wasn't right. They were too much. I needed space. It's better this way. These stories reduce discomfort, and that reduction can look like confidence. So you think they got away. But what really happened is the emotional bill hasn't arrived yet. And the bill arrives in stages. The first price is internal. It's the cost of choosing control over intimacy. When someone ends a relationship to avoid discomfort, instead of learning how to communicate through it, they teach their nervous system one lesson: running works. That lesson becomes a habit, and habits become identity. They start believing they are just not a relationship person. They start believing love is suffocating. They start believing commitment always leads to pressure. They don't realize they are training themselves to equate safety with distance. That is a heavy price, because it creates a life that might look calm on the outside, but feels disconnected inside. The second price is relational. They take the same nervous system into every new relationship. They can change partners, but the pattern follows them. At first, they may feel powerful. Fresh start, new attention, less demand, but all relationships reach the same threshold eventually, the moment intimacy asks for consistency. The moment someone wants clarity. The moment someone wants emotional presence. And at that threshold, if they haven't healed, the same panic rises and the same escape appears. They repeat the cycle and call it chemistry problems or bad timing or the wrong person. But the truth is, the pattern is the common denominator. This is what it means that they pay a price where you can't see it. You might only see the highlight reel. You might see them dating again. You might see them smiling. But you don't see the pattern of avoidance quietly destroying their ability to build lasting intimacy. You don't see the missed opportunities. You don't see the shallow connections. You don't see the way they keep starting over because they can't stay when it gets real. The third price is emotional. The delayed grief. Avoidants often don't grieve at the moment of leaving. They grieve when the relationship becomes truly unavailable. They grieve when you stop chasing. They grieve when they realize your energy is gone. They grieve when life has a moment that would normally bring you to mind, and the reality hits: I can't reach them. This grief is often quiet and private. It can look like sudden nostalgia. It can look like late night emptiness. It can look like checking your profile. It can look like hovering. It can look like regret disguised as curiosity. It can look like them reaching out, just to see how you are. Not because they have the maturity to repair, but because they are feeling the discomfort of loss and seeking relief. And if they can't handle that discomfort, they turn it into something else: resentment. They moved on too fast. They changed. They're cold. That's because resentment feels safer than regret. Regret requires humility. Regret requires admitting you lost something valuable because of your own actions. That's hard for someone whose whole system is built around avoiding emotional exposure. The fourth price is moral. This one is rarely spoken, but it's real. Every time you discard someone who loved you sincerely, you chip away at your own self-respect. Even if they act confident, there is often a quiet awareness underneath. I hurt someone. I ran. I didn't show up. And to live with that awareness, they either grow or they harden. If they harden, they become more defended, more numb, more emotionally unavailable. They become less capable of repair, less capable of accountability, less capable of staying through discomfort. That hardening becomes a prison, because it blocks not just pain, but love. And here is the reason this keynote keeps viewers watching until the end. The heaviest price avoidance pay is not losing you in one moment, it's losing the capacity to keep someone like you. Someone real, someone warm, someone willing to build. They might replace the relationship, but they can't replace the safety you offered if they keep repeating the same avoidance. They can find attention. They can find chemistry, but stable intimacy requires skills they avoided developing. So yes, they pay a heavy price. But hear me clearly, your healing cannot depend on watching them pay it. Your win is that you stop believing their calm face means you were disposable. Your win is that you stop craving proof that they hurt too. Your win is that you start valuing yourself enough to step away from anyone who can only love you in phases. Because the truth is, the most powerful consequence is not what happens to them. It's what happens to you. You stop bleeding for someone who refused to learn how to hold you. I'm going to show you the first price they pay. They trade intimacy for control, and relief can look like peace, but it becomes emptiness. This keynote matters because it reveals the hidden bargain behind so many avoidant discards. People think the avoidant leaves because they stopped caring, but often they leave because caring started asking something of them. It started asking for consistency. It started asking for emotional presence. It started asking for vulnerability. And for an avoidant nervous system, those things can feel like danger. So they do what they've learned to do. They choose control. Control, in this context, is not always control over you. It's control over feeling, control over exposure, control over being needed, control over the risk of intimacy. When they discard, the immediate sensation they often feel is relief. The tension drops. The pressure disappears. They're no longer in the arena where someone can see their flaws, ask for more, expect consistency, or notice their withdrawal. So their body relaxes, and that relief can look like peace even to them. They might even tell themselves, I'm finally free. They might confuse the absence of discomfort with the presence of health. But relief is not peace. Relief is a pause. Peace is integration. Relief is what you feel when the alarm stops ringing. Peace is what you feel when your life is stable. Relief is temporary, and it has a cost if you keep choosing it. Because if every time intimacy rises you escape into relief, you never build the capacity for real connection. You build a life organized around avoiding discomfort. And that's the first heavy price they pay. They trade intimacy for control. In the beginning, this trade can feel like winning. They can feel empowered. They can feel untouchable. They can feel like they protected themselves. They may even look calm and confident, which can make you feel crazy, because you're the one grieving while they seem unchanged. But what you're seeing is not necessarily strength. It's often shutdown. It's the nervous system doing what it has always done, going numb to stay safe. And numbness has consequences. When you repeatedly choose control over intimacy, you start losing access to your own emotional depth. You can't selectively numb. You can't shut down pain without also shutting down joy, tenderness, and real attachment. So yes, they avoid the discomfort of vulnerability, but they also avoid the nourishment of being deeply known. That's why many avoidants can seem functional and fine, yet feel internally restless, dissatisfied, or empty. Because the human heart doesn't thrive on control, it thrives on connection. Even if someone has taught themselves not to need it, the need doesn't vanish, it just becomes buried. This is where the emptiness begins. It doesn't show up immediately. It shows up quietly. It shows up when they realize their relationships keep starting over. It shows up when they get attention but don't feel truly met. It shows up when the easy connections don't soothe them the way they thought they would. It shows up when life has a moment that calls for closeness, and they have no safe place to go. It shows up when they crave intimacy but feel allergic to it at the same time. That contradiction is the price. Because control creates an illusion of safety, but it also creates isolation. The more they rely on distance as regulation, the more they train themselves to treat closeness like a threat. And that means even when love is available, they can't rest inside it. They can receive it for a moment, then feel overwhelmed and pull away. They can enjoy the early stage when nothing is demanded, then sabotage the deeper stage when attachment becomes real. So they keep repeating a cycle that looks like bad luck, but it's actually a nervous system pattern. This keynote also explains why discarding you can become a turning point for them later. Because if you were a person who offered real warmth, real steadiness, real care, your presence may have been one of the few experiences that challenged their numbness. Your love may have been one of the few places where they almost felt safe enough to be fully seen. And when they discard you, they don't just lose a partner. They lose an opportunity to grow into intimacy. They lose a mirror that was showing them what real connection could feel like. They lose the chance to develop the muscles they keep avoiding. But because their immediate sensation was relief, they don't recognize that loss right away. They feel the short-term benefit and ignore the long-term cost. That's why the price becomes emptiness. Because emptiness is what happens when you keep choosing relief over growth. It's what happens when you keep leaving right at the moment you could have matured. It's what happens when you keep controlling your way out of discomfort, instead of learning how to communicate through it. And this is the most important message for the viewer, who was discarded. Their choice to trade intimacy for control was about their capacity, not your worth. You didn't fail to be lovable. You simply became real enough to require them to show up, and they chose the thing their nervous system has always chosen: control. And yes, that hurts. But it also clarifies something powerful. You cannot build a safe relationship with someone who only feels safe when they are distant. So when you hear, they traded intimacy for control, understand what that means. It means they chose short-term relief over long-term love. It means they chose the comfort of distance over the courage of closeness. It means they chose a life that may look calm, but over time can feel empty, because control can prevent heartbreak, but it can also prevent real connection. Then comes the delayed grief nobody talks about, the stage where they act fine at first, but the loss returns later in fragments that start haunting them. This keynote matters because it explains the cruel time gap that makes you doubt your reality after being discarded. You grieve immediately because you were emotionally present. You were invested, you were building. So the moment the connection is cut, your heart feels it like a sudden drop. But avoidants often don't process loss in real time. They process it in reverse. They protect first, then feel later. And that delay can make it look like they didn't care, when what's actually happening is that they're avoiding the experience of caring. In the beginning after a discard, the avoidant often looks lighter. They might seem relieved. They might act productive. They might distract themselves with work, friends, new attention, anything that keeps them from sitting still. And to you, that can feel humiliating, because you're in emotional free fall while they appear untouched. But what you're seeing is not necessarily emotional closure. You're seeing an avoidance response. When someone's nervous system has learned that big feelings are dangerous, the first reaction to loss is not grief. It's shutdown. It's a quick return to control. This is why delayed grief is so real. Grief requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is what avoidants resist most. So the grief doesn't come when the relationship ends. It comes when the defenses stop working. It comes when distraction fails. It comes when the absence becomes undeniable. It comes when they realize the door is not just closed for the day. It's closed for real. And what does delayed grief look like? It rarely looks like dramatic sobbing. It often looks like fragments. A random memory at 2 a.m. A song that suddenly hits harder than it should. A place that feels different without you. A moment of loneliness that arrives out of nowhere. A craving to reach out, quickly followed by pride or fear. A sudden urge to check if you still exist on the other side of the door. These fragments are haunting because they are unpredictable. They slip past the avoidance control. They interrupt their distractions. They show up in quiet moments when no one is watching. And because avoidants don't always have the emotional language to say, "I miss them," the grief often gets mislabeled inside them. They call it boredom. They call it irritation. They call it restlessness. They call it nothing. But the body knows. The body remembers connection even when the mind tries to minimize it. This is also why they might reach out at the weirdest times. Not when you expect. Not right after the breakup. Sometimes weeks later. Sometimes months later. Sometimes when you've finally started healing. Because delayed grief doesn't follow the calendar. It follows the moment the avoidant loses the belief that they still have access. That's the key. Many avoidants hold a silent assumption that you will remain emotionally available. Even if you're not together, they assume you care. They assume they can return. They assume you're still reachable. That assumption keeps them from feeling the full loss, because the bond still feels like it exists in the background. But when your energy truly leaves, when you stop checking, stop reacting, stop responding warmly, stop being predictable, the assumption collapses. And when that collapses, grief has room to enter. Now for the viewer, this keynote is important because it stops them from chasing proof. It stops them from reopening the wound just to make the avoidant feel something. Because you can't force someone to process loss. You can't force someone to grieve on your timeline. And trying to force it only keeps you tied to the very dynamic that hurt you. You become the manager of their emotions instead of the protector of your own. It also explains why avoidants can look like they moved on quickly. Sometimes they do move on to distraction. New attention can numb the loss temporarily. Novelty can mask emptiness. But novelty doesn't heal attachment wounds. It only delays them. And that's why the grief returns in fragments, because the new person can't replace the nervous system familiarity you provided. The new person can't replicate the way you knew them, the way you held their contradictions, the way you made them feel safe even when they were pulling away. They may not admit that, but their body will feel it when the distractions end. And when the fragments begin, the avoidant faces a fork in the road. One road is growth. The other is deeper avoidance. Growth looks like reflection. Why do I keep doing this? Why do I run when it gets real? Why do I sabotage closeness? It looks like accountability. It looks like an honest attempt to repair, not just to soothe their loneliness. It looks like learning new skills, communication, emotional regulation, consistency. Deeper avoidance looks like blaming you. They were too much. They were needy. They changed. They moved on too fast. Blame is a shield. It keeps them from feeling exposed. Because if they admit they miss you, they have to admit they lost something valuable. And admitting that means admitting they contributed to the loss. So the delayed grief stage is the part of the heavy price that you don't see from the outside. You see a calm face, but you don't see the private moments where the loss returns like a ghost. You don't see the restlessness that no distraction fully fixes. You don't see the late night memories that cut through the numbness. And you shouldn't build your healing around watching them pay that price. But you should know it exists, because it frees you from the lie that they walked away unaffected. And it helps you stop taking their first calm reaction as the final truth. And here's the twist. The biggest price isn't missing you. It's losing the ability to receive love without suspicion. So they repeat the pattern and call it bad luck. This keynote matters because it explains the real tragedy behind avoidant discards. The audience expects the heavy price to be regret, loneliness, heartbreak, that dramatic moment where the avoidant finally realizes what they lost. And yes, those moments can happen. But the deeper price, the one that shapes their whole life, is not one emotion. It's a damaged relationship to love itself. When an avoidant discards, they don't just lose a person, they reinforce a belief. They reinforce a nervous system rule that says, closeness equals danger. And every time that rule gets reinforced, it becomes harder for them to accept love when it's offered. Not because love isn't good, but because their system doesn't interpret it as safe. This is what receiving love without suspicion means. A secure person can receive affection and let it land. They can trust consistency. They can relax into closeness. An avoidant often struggles to do that. When someone loves them sincerely, a part of them may want it, but another part of them becomes alert. They start scanning for what the love will cost them. Will they need more from me? Will they want too much? Will I be trapped? Will I disappoint them? Will they see my flaws? Will they demand consistency I can't sustain? These questions don't come from logic alone. They come from a nervous system that learned long ago that dependence is unsafe. So instead of receiving love as nourishment, they receive it as pressure. And once love feels like pressure, the avoidance mind begins to protect them by creating suspicion. Suspicion is the mental armor that keeps intimacy from reaching the deepest parts. They start assuming the other person has an agenda. They assume needs are control. They assume emotional conversations are criticism. They assume closeness will eventually become suffocation. And because they assume it, they act accordingly. They withdraw. They minimize. They delay messages. They avoid deep talks. They create distance. Not always because they don't care, but because caring feels like exposure. Now, why is this the biggest price? Because missing you is temporary. Loneliness comes and goes. But losing the ability to receive love without suspicion is life-shaping. It means even when love appears, they can't keep it. It means they can date, they can flirt, they can enjoy the honeymoon stage. But when things start to deepen, their system rebels. The closer someone gets, the more their anxiety rises. And they confuse that anxiety with incompatibility. They say, something feels off. They say, I'm not sure. They say, I need space. They don't realize that what feels off is intimacy itself. That's why they repeat the pattern and call it bad luck. They move from relationship to relationship, thinking they just haven't found the right person. They say people are too emotional. They say people want too much. They say they keep attracting clingy partners. But the truth is, if your nervous system interprets normal intimacy as threat, then any healthy partner will eventually feel like too much. Because healthy partners want clarity, connection, and consistency. So they keep starting over. Fresh beginning, fresh chemistry, low demand, lots of novelty. And novelty is the perfect environment for avoidant attachment because novelty doesn't ask for depth yet. Novelty doesn't require repair. Novelty doesn't challenge their fear of being seen. They can show up intensely at first, feel excited, feel in control, feel safe because the bond isn't heavy yet. But then time passes, attachment forms, the other person becomes real, needs appear, emotional conversations arise, expectations become natural, and that's when suspicion shows up again. They start interpreting closeness as control. They start interpreting love as pressure. They start pulling away, and then they tell themselves the relationship is wrong. We're not compatible. They're too needy. I'm not feeling it anymore. And without realizing it, they repeat the same discard that once gave them relief. So what is the heavy price? They build a life where love keeps arriving, and they keep rejecting it, not because love isn't good, but because their system doesn't know how to receive it safely. That's why so many avoidants end up in a loop of almosts. Almost committed, almost vulnerable, almost consistent, almost in love. But never fully, because fully requires surrendering control, and surrender feels unsafe. This keynote also explains why you, the one discarded, often feel like you were too much. Because your love was likely healthy enough to ask for depth. You asked for consistency. You asked for communication. You asked for repair. And to a secure partner, those are basics. To an avoidant, those basics can feel like a trap. So they label the basics as pressure. And they label you as the problem, because blaming you is easier than admitting they don't have the skills to hold intimacy. But here's the twist inside the twist. When they discard someone who truly loved them, they don't just lose a person, they lose evidence that love can be safe. They lose a chance to rewire their nervous system inside a stable bond. They lose a chance to learn that emotional presence doesn't equal losing yourself. And every time they run, the nervous system learns running keeps me safe, so suspicion grows, defenses grow, and love becomes harder to trust. That is the heavy price. And if you're watching as the person who was discarded, this keynote isn't meant to make you wait for their downfall. It's meant to release you from self-blame, because if someone cannot receive love without suspicion, they can't fully receive you either. No matter how patient you are, no matter how gentle you speak, no matter how much you shrink, you cannot love someone into emotional safety if they keep interpreting love as threat. So the bad luck they complain about is often the shadow of their own unhealed pattern. And the freedom for you is this: being discarded did not mean you were not enough. It often meant you were offering the kind of love their nervous system didn't know how to hold. In the final part, I'll explain the ultimate consequence that flips the power forever. One day access to you becomes impossible, because you're no longer the person who accepts crumbs. This keynote matters because it delivers the ending your nervous system has been craving. Not a fantasy where they beg, not a revenge scene where they suffer publicly, but a real-life shift where the dynamic breaks because you change. The biggest consequence for an avoidant is not punishment, it's permanence. It's the moment they realize you are no longer a revolving door they can enter when lonely and exit when overwhelmed. Most avoidant cycles survive for one reason: access without responsibility. They can disappear then return. They can go cold, then come back warm. They can avoid hard conversations, then reset with a sweet message. They can keep you emotionally attached while remaining partially present. And the reason it works is not because they have magical power. It's because you keep giving access. You keep reopening the door, because you still hope the warm version of them will finally become the consistent version. You keep responding because silence hurts and contact brings temporary relief. You keep forgiving because you think love means understanding. But that is not love. That is you paying for connection with your self-respect. So the ultimate consequence begins the moment you stop doing that. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly and consistently. You stop rewarding withdrawal with reassurance. You stop rewarding breadcrumbs with full intimacy. You stop turning their A into a reunion. You stop giving relationship-level access to someone who isn't showing relationship-level effort. This is the part people misunderstand. They think the consequence is you becoming mean. No. The consequence is you becoming clear. The consequence is you treating your time, your body, your emotions, and your peace like they're valuable. Because they are. And here's why access becomes impossible. Because your nervous system rewires. You stop being hooked by the same triggers. In the past, a breadcrumb could pull you back because you were starving. A vague apology felt like hope because you were desperate for closure. A casual message felt like a breakthrough because you were living in uncertainty. But as you heal, your standards rise. Your tolerance for confusion drops. Your desire for stability becomes stronger than your desire for their attention. And when that happens, the old tricks stop working. That is when the power flips forever. Because avoidants often rely on one hidden comfort, the belief that you are still reachable. Even if you're upset, even if you're hurt, even if time passes. They assume that if they ever feel lonely enough, they can return and you'll soften. That assumption is what prevents them from fully feeling the loss. It's what keeps the relationship floating in the background. It's what allows them to discard without facing finality. But when you stop accepting crumbs, that assumption collapses. And that collapse is the real consequence. They may test you, they may hover. They may send a casual message to see if you respond the old way. They may try to re-enter lightly because they're afraid of accountability. They may even try to trigger nostalgia. I was thinking about you. I miss you. I hope you're okay. And if you respond with full access, the old dynamic restarts. Their nervous system calms. They feel control again. They get comfort without change. But if you don't, if you respond slowly, if you require clarity, if you ask for responsibility, if you keep your standards steady, they meet something new. The door only opens for maturity now. And that's when access becomes impossible for the version of them that refuses to grow. This is why so many avoidants vanish again when you become healthy. They don't disappear because you did something wrong. They disappear because you remove the bargain. They can't stay in a relationship where they can't control closeness with distance anymore. They can't survive in a dynamic where your love no longer comes at the cost of your self-abandonment. Now, here's the most important emotional truth of this keynote. The moment access becomes impossible is not a loss, it's a graduation. It's you graduating from survival love, from anxious love, from love that feels like waiting, from love that keeps you small. It's you stepping into a new identity, someone who doesn't negotiate for basic respect. This is where the viewer needs to understand something deeply. You don't become hoard. You become whole. You don't become cold. You become protected. You don't stop loving. You stop leaking. Because when you've been discarded, part of you wants the final scene where they finally realize. But healing is not them realizing. Healing is you no longer needing them to realize. Healing is you no longer interpreting their inability to love properly as your responsibility to love harder. Healing is you no longer chasing closure from someone who avoids discomfort. Healing is you being able to say quietly, I'm not angry, I'm just not available for that anymore. And this is what changes the meaning of price. The heavy price avoidants pay for discarding you is that they lose access to your softness. Not because you became cruel, but because you became wise. They lose access to the version of you that tolerated inconsistency. They lose access to the person who kept the relationship alive alone. They lose access to the emotional home you provided without requiring them to earn it. And this is the part that flips the power forever, because your absence is not dramatic. It's stable. It's clean. It's final in a way they can't negotiate with a breadcrumb. They can't return to the old dynamic because the old you is gone. Now, could they still come back?
Yes.
But if they come back for real, the price is growth. The price is accountability. The price is learning new behavior. The price is giving you consistency, not just contact. And if they aren't willing to pay that price, then access to you is impossible. That's not punishment. That's self-respect. And the final win is this: they might pay a heavy price, but you stop paying yours. You stop paying with your sleep. You stop paying with your self-esteem. You stop paying with your peace. You stop paying with your dignity. One day you look up and realize the discard didn't destroy you, it woke you up. And the moment you are no longer available for crumbs is the moment you stop being a chapter in their pattern and you become the author of your life.